The palace was alive with energy as the morning sun streamed through the tall windows, casting golden patterns on the marble floors. Courtiers moved quickly, adjusting their elegant attire, whispering among themselves and making sure every corner of the grand hall was perfect for the upcoming rehearsal. Today was special because King Leo XIV had personally invited a small ensemble to perform, and everyone knew that his attention could make or break reputations. Among the musicians was a young pianist who carried nothing but a small bag of personal belongings. His clothes were simple and neat, not flashy like many of the other performers. There was no jewelry or showy attire to draw attention. His shoes were polished and his hands, though slightly calloused, were careful and precise. He moved quietly through the hall, taking in the towering chandeliers, the rich tapestries, and the polished floors that reflected the sunlight. Despite the grandeur, he seemed calm, almost as if the palace itself did not intimidate him. As the choir gathered and tuned their voices, whispers started to travel across the room. Some courtiers were curious, others skeptical. A few whispered to each other about the young pianist, questioning whether someone so plain-looking could really meet the king's high expectations. There was a subtle undercurrent of doubt, a feeling that appearances mattered more than skill in this setting. The pianist overheard some of these murmurs but chose to ignore them, focusing instead on the piano that had been set up near the center of the hall. It was an old instrument, yet polished and grand, with a rich history etched into its wood. The king himself had entered the hall, his presence commanding immediate attention. He was tall, regal, and confident, moving with a sense of authority that made the entire room seem smaller. His eyes scanned the performers with curiosity, resting briefly on the young pianist. There was a faint smirk on the king's face, a silent challenge that seemed to say, "Let's see if you are truly worthy of this hall." The pianist did not flinch, only gave a polite nod in acknowledgement and began to arrange his music sheets neatly. The choir began warming up, their voices blending into a gentle hum that filled the vast space. Some of them looked toward the pianist, intrigued by his quiet demeanor. There was no arrogance, no desperate attempt to impress. Instead, there was a calm confidence that seemed to grow stronger as the moments passed. The pianist took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the king's gaze but also a strange sense of calm. He had performed in many places before, some grand, some humble, and he knew that music could speak louder than words. As the rehearsal started, the pianist's fingers hovered over the keys, moving with care and precision. Each note was considered, each chord deliberate. The music began softly, almost cautiously, but as he found his rhythm, it grew stronger and more confident. The sound resonated through the hall, rich and warm, blending with the choir's voices. Even those who had doubted him felt a shift, an undeniable sense of awe beginning to build. The king leaned slightly forward, his smirk fading into a look of curiosity. He had heard many musicians in his lifetime, some famous, some lesser known. But there was something different about this young pianist. The notes were not just played. They seemed to tell a story, each chord carrying emotion and depth. The hall itself seemed to respond, the sunlight glinting off the polished floors and reflecting the beauty of the sound. Courtiers who had been whispering began to listen in silence, drawn into the music. As the minutes passed, the pianist's focus never wavered. He seemed to be in a world of his own, yet perfectly in tune with the space around him. The choir followed his lead, their voices rising and falling in harmony with the piano. The combination created a delicate balance, a dance of sound that filled the room. The young pianist occasionally glanced at the sheet music, but mostly he played from memory, letting his hands flow naturally over the keys. The king observed quietly, no longer smirking. Instead, his brow was slightly furrowed, a sign of deep thought. He had underestimated the pianist at first glance, assuming that someone so modest in appearance could not deliver anything extraordinary. Yet the music spoke differently. It was not just technical skill. It was expression, emotion, and a subtle brilliance that could not be ignored. The young pianist's calm demeanor, combined with his mastery, created a presence that was impossible to overlook. Other musicians began to notice small details as well. The pianist's fingers moved with precision, yet there was a warmth to each note. He seemed to anticipate the choir's movements, adjusting the tempo and dynamics as if he were not just accompanying them, but guiding them through the story of the music. Every chord, every pause carried meaning. Even those who had been skeptical felt their doubts melt away, replaced by admiration. As the rehearsal continued, the young pianist did not seek attention or praise. He played for the music itself, letting it speak. This quiet dedication was something rare, especially in a hall filled with individuals used to seeking recognition. The king noticed this as well, sensing that true talent was being displayed not through arrogance but through skill and humility. There was a subtle shift in the energy of the room, a growing respect for the pianist that transcended appearances. When the first piece ended, there was a brief pause. The sound lingered in the air, the echoes of the piano and choir creating a gentle resonance that made the hall feel alive. Courtiers exchanged looks, some in disbelief, others in silent appreciation. The young pianist rose slowly from the bench, adjusting his sheet music with careful hands. He did not bow or seek approval. He simply acknowledged the room with a quiet nod, letting the music itself serve as his introduction. King Leo XIV remained seated, his eyes fixed on the pianist. He had entered the hall expecting to be entertained at best, perhaps amused at worst. Instead, he had witnessed a performance that demanded respect. There was no immediate reaction, no applause yet, only a moment of silence where everyone seemed to collectively recognize something extraordinary. The pianist had arrived at the palace with nothing but his talent, yet it had already begun to speak volumes. As the next piece was about to begin, the pianist took another deep breath, centering himself. The anticipation in the room was palpable. Courtiers, choir members, and even palace staff seemed to lean in slightly, drawn by the quiet confidence emanating from the young musician. King Leo XIV's gaze softened, now mixed with curiosity and intrigue. He had underestimated the power of skill over appearance, and he could feel that this performance was about to become something memorable. The pianist's hands rested lightly on the keys, preparing for the next sequence. There was no rush, no hint of nervousness. His calm presence was like an anchor in the vast palace hall, steadying everyone around him. The choir waited, poised and ready, trusting the guidance that seemed to flow effortlessly from the pianist's touch. Outside, the sun continued to shine, but inside, all eyes were fixed on the music and the quiet figure who commanded it without a single word. Every note that followed was precise yet alive, technical yet full of emotion. The young pianist moved seamlessly through complex passages, his focus unbroken. The choir responded, their voices blending in perfect harmony, following his lead as if guided by an invisible thread. The room itself seemed to hold its breath, caught in the delicate balance between sound and silence, anticipation and fulfillment. By the time the rehearsal ended for the morning, the atmosphere in the palace had completely shifted. Whispers of doubt had disappeared, replaced by quiet admiration. The courtiers no longer questioned the pianist's abilities. Instead, they began to recognize the rare gift in front of them. Even King Leo XIV, who had entered the hall expecting to mock or challenge, found himself thinking about the skill and calm presence of the young musician. He realized that appearances could be deceiving, and true talent often arrived in the most unassuming forms. As the performers gathered their things, the pianist remained composed, collecting his sheet music and ensuring the piano was ready for the next session. There was no fanfare, no attempt to draw attention to himself. He had played not for recognition but for the music, and in doing so had already left a mark on everyone present. The memory of his performance lingered in the hall, a quiet reminder that skill and humility could speak louder than words or appearances. And so, as the morning light continued to fill the grand hall, the young pianist prepared for the next part of the rehearsal. Unseen yet felt by all, a subtle energy had shifted. What had begun as just another performance had transformed into a moment of quiet revelation. The palace staff, the choir, the courtiers, and even King Leo XIII were now witnesses to something extraordinary, though none of them could yet predict the full impact this musician would have in the days to come. The afternoon sun had begun to tilt, casting long shadows across the palace courtyard, but inside the grand hall, tension hung thick in the air. The choir had paused briefly, and the young pianist adjusted his music sheets on the piano with steady hands. He had performed flawlessly in the morning, but he could sense that the next moment would be different. King Leo XIV, who had been quietly observing from his seat at the edge of the hall, now rose slowly. His movement carried authority and a hint of mischief, a subtle warning that something was about to happen. He walked toward the pianist, his polished boots echoing on the marble floor. The room fell almost silent, courtiers holding their breath as the king approached. There was a glint of amusement in his eyes, the kind that suggested he had already made up his mind to test the young musician. The pianist remained calm, his back straight and hands resting lightly on the keys. There was no tremor in his posture, no hint of fear, just a quiet readiness that seemed to challenge the king without a single word. "Tell me," the king said, his voice carrying a mix of curiosity and sarcasm, "do you truly believe you can play something worthy of this hall? Something that will make us all listen?" The pianist lifted his gaze, meeting the king's eyes with composure. He did not reply immediately, only nodded slightly, acknowledging the question as if it were part of the music itself. The king's smirk widened, sensing that the silence was a sign of either boldness or foolishness. He turned slightly to the courtiers and whispered, "Let us see if he can rise to the challenge or crumble under the weight of expectation." The room felt heavier now, the walls seeming closer, the chandeliers shining brighter in a way that highlighted the tension. The choir straightened, their voices falling into silence as they sensed the upcoming test. Even the palace staff, accustomed to unusual behavior from the king, felt a strange nervousness settle over the hall. Something about this moment made it clear that no ordinary performance would be sufficient. King Leo XIV gestured toward the piano. "Play something complex," he said, his tone teasing yet firm. "A piece not commonly known, something that will truly test your skill. If you falter, the mistake will be remembered." The pianist took a deep breath, letting the words settle in but refusing to let them disturb his focus. He knew that this was a test not of speed or loudness but of control and poise. He chose to start with a delicate prelude, allowing the music to flow naturally before introducing more intricate elements. His fingers pressed the keys lightly at first, letting each note resonate fully, filling the hall with soft harmonies that spoke without haste. The king leaned back slightly, crossing his arms. He expected hesitation, an error that would break the young pianist's composure. Instead, the music began to develop, growing richer and more intricate with each measure. The pianist's hands moved with a calm confidence, anticipating the nuances of the piece, adding subtle ornaments that brought depth and emotion. The choir watched intently, following his lead, their previous doubts replaced by awe. Some courtiers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, murmuring quietly to each other. They had assumed that the young pianist's modest appearance meant a lack of true talent. Now, with every note, their skepticism was challenged. They could hear not only technical skill but an artistry that went beyond simple practice. It was as if the music itself had a story to tell, a story that only someone truly in touch with the instrument could reveal. King Leo XIV's expression began to change. The smirk had faded, replaced by a look of concentration. He watched closely as the pianist navigated difficult passages with apparent ease. The fingers flew over the keys in swift movements that were precise yet expressive. Even the most complex sequences were played with clarity, each note finding its place perfectly. There was a balance of strength and delicacy, of emotion and technique, that captivated the entire hall. As the piece progressed, the room seemed to shrink, focusing entirely on the interaction between the pianist and the piano. The echoes of each chord lingered, resonating in the air long after the keys were released. The choir, who had expected a faltering performance, followed the pianist's cues instinctively. Their voices rose and fell in harmony with the music, guided by an invisible thread woven by his hands. Even the king, known for his exacting standards, could not hide the growing respect in his eyes. The pianist did not rush despite the challenge set before him. Each measure was deliberate, each pause intentional. The complexity of the music demanded concentration and care, but he handled it with a calm authority that suggested years of disciplined practice. He did not play for applause or recognition. He played for the music itself, allowing it to communicate in ways words could not. The hall itself seemed to respond, the sound filling every corner, reaching even the farthest courtyards. At one point, the king moved slightly closer, curious about the subtleties of the performance. The pianist, without glancing up, adjusted a phrase, softening a passage and adding a delicate touch that highlighted the emotional depth of the composition. The shift was subtle, almost imperceptible to the untrained ear, but it created a ripple through the hall. Courtiers leaned forward, palace staff paused their work, and the choir held its collective breath. The music was alive, not just played but felt, As the performance continued, the king's earlier amusement began to dissolve into genuine intrigue. He realized that he had underestimated not only the skill, but the composure of the young pianist. This was a test meant to provoke and expose weakness, yet the pianist had met it with quiet strength, turning the king's challenge into an opportunity to shine. The room was no longer a place of judgment but a canvas for the pianist's artistry. The complexity of the piece increased, demanding both precision and emotion. The pianist navigated rapid passages with ease, his fingers moving like dancers across the keys. He introduced subtle variations, unexpected harmonies, and dynamic contrasts that brought the music to life. Every note was deliberate, every pause meaningful. The choir, sensing the direction of the music, responded perfectly, their voices blending seamlessly with the piano. The harmony was not just technical but emotional, creating a moment of shared understanding between performers and audience. Despite the king's earlier mockery, the performance was flawless. The pianist's calm presence and mastery of the instrument transformed the challenge into a moment of revelation. The courtiers, once skeptical, now watched in awe, realizing that true talent could not be measured by appearance alone. The young pianist had not only met the king's expectations but had elevated the entire rehearsal into something extraordinary. The final notes lingered in the air, resonating with a quiet power. The room was silent, not from fear or discomfort but from the collective impact of what had just been witnessed. King Leo XIV remained still, his expression a mixture of surprise, admiration, and contemplation. He had entered the hall intending to mock and test, yet the pianist had turned the situation around with dignity and skill. It was a silent triumph, a demonstration of how composure and talent could overcome even the harshest judgment. As the pianist lifted his hands from the keys, he did not seek applause. He simply adjusted his sheet music and acknowledged the room with a quiet nod. The choir, who had watched and followed him with growing respect, mirrored his calm demeanor. Even the king, momentarily speechless, recognized the depth of the performance. The challenge had been met, not with arrogance or showmanship, but with quiet strength, discipline, and a profound understanding of music. The atmosphere in the hall had changed completely. What had begun as a moment of potential embarrassment had transformed into a showcase of skill and composure. The courtiers whispered among themselves, sharing glances of surprise and admiration. The palace staff moved quietly, respecting the gravity of the performance. Even the sunlight that streamed through the tall windows seemed to highlight the pianist, casting him in a warm glow that mirrored the respect he had earned. King Leo XIV finally spoke, breaking the silence. His voice was calm, almost reflective. "You have exceeded expectation," he said, acknowledging not only the technical skill but the courage to perform under scrutiny. There was no longer mockery in his tone, only recognition. The pianist nodded, accepting the praise with humility, understanding that the moment was about more than personal achievement. It was about proving that talent and composure could shine in the face of doubt. The rehearsal continued, but the energy in the room had shifted. The young pianist moved through subsequent pieces with confidence, his presence commanding respect without demanding attention. The choir followed effortlessly, inspired by his leadership and calm assurance. The courtiers and staff, once ready to judge, now watched with genuine appreciation. And King Leo XIV, who had entered expecting amusement, had discovered a quiet brilliance that he could neither ignore nor dismiss. By the end of the afternoon, the young pianist had transformed the perception of everyone in the hall. Doubt had been replaced by admiration, skepticism by respect, and mockery by awe. It was clear that this musician, humble in appearance yet extraordinary in skill, had made a lasting impression on all who witnessed his performance. And in the quiet moments that followed, the palace itself seemed to hold its breath, acknowledging the extraordinary display of talent. The hall was quiet now, save for the soft echoes of the final notes that had lingered after the pianist's previous piece. King Leo XIV remained seated, his eyes fixed on the young musician. For a moment, the entire room seemed frozen, every person holding their breath, waiting to see what would come next. The pianist, sensing the weight of expectation, did not waver. His hands rested lightly on the keys, fingers poised, ready to bring the next piece to life. He began with a delicate touch, letting the first few notes float through the hall like a gentle breeze. The sound was soft, almost hesitant at first, as if testing the room's response. But it quickly grew richer, each chord resonating deeply, filling the palace with warmth. The choir leaned forward, their voices waiting to follow his lead, sensing that something remarkable was about to happen. King Leo XIV, who had come to witness entertainment and perhaps to mock, found himself leaning slightly forward in his chair. There was no smirk now, only a keen interest. The notes carried emotion and subtlety that he had not anticipated. The music was not merely played, it was felt, every key a conversation between the pianist and the hall itself. Courtiers, once skeptical, exchanged glances, their previous doubts beginning to dissolve. The pianist's fingers moved with incredible precision, yet there was a natural fluidity to every motion. He navigated rapid passages with ease, allowing each note to breathe before moving on to the next. It was as if he could see the music in his mind, his hands merely translating it into sound. Each chord was deliberate, each pause intentional, creating a rhythm that drew the audience deeper into the experience. The choir responded instinctively, their voices blending seamlessly with the piano. They had been following his cues for years, but today felt different. The young pianist's calm presence guided them effortlessly, every phrase of the music carefully shaped. The harmony was not just technical, it was emotional, telling a story without a single word. Even the most experienced courtiers were captivated, leaning slightly forward, unable to look away. As the music developed, the complexity increased. The pianist introduced subtle variations, unexpected harmonies, and gentle crescendos that made the performance feel alive. Every gesture was intentional, a reflection of both skill and understanding. He did not rush or force the notes. Instead, he allowed the music to unfold naturally, revealing layers of beauty and depth. The king watched intently, recognizing the mastery in each movement, a realization that left him momentarily speechless. Some courtiers began to murmur quietly among themselves, expressing amazement at what they were witnessing. They had doubted the young pianist, thinking that modest appearance equaled modest talent. But now every doubt was replaced with a deep admiration. The pianist had transformed the hall into a space where skill and emotion combined, creating something that transcended mere performance. The pianist's control over dynamics was extraordinary. He could make the softest notes resonate as if they were delicate whispers, and the loudest passages thunder like a storm contained within the hall. Each transition was seamless, never forced, always intentional. It was clear that this performance was not about showing off, but about conveying the essence of the music itself. The audience could feel it, their emotions moving in sync with the flow of the notes. King Leo XIV's expression shifted from curiosity to genuine intrigue. He had expected hesitation, perhaps a flaw, a crack in the pianist's composure that he could mock. Instead, he found nothing but poise and brilliance. The young musician's performance was turning the king's challenge into an extraordinary showcase of artistry. For the first time, the king saw talent not in appearance or flamboyance, but in quiet mastery. The pianist now introduced a particularly challenging sequence, rapid and intricate, demanding both precision and emotion. His fingers danced across the keys, each note perfectly timed, every chord clear and deliberate. The hall seemed to respond, the vibrations of the piano filling the space, creating a harmony that even the walls seemed to echo. The choir, feeling the intensity, elevated their voices accordingly, blending perfectly with the piano, creating a sound that was rich, dynamic, and utterly captivating. The courtiers were spellbound. Even those who had been openly skeptical now leaned forward, eyes wide, ears attuned to every subtle nuance. The palace staff paused in their duties, quietly watching as if witnessing a rare miracle. The music was not just heard, it was felt. It resonated in the heart, stirring emotions that words could never capture. The young pianist's mastery was not limited to technique, but extended to an understanding of how music could move people deeply and profoundly. King Leo XIV, for the first time, found himself entirely absorbed. He realized that the music was more than notes on a page. It was a conversation, a journey that the pianist was guiding them through. Every chord, every pause, every gentle touch of the keys conveyed a story. He had expected entertainment, perhaps amusement, but now he was witnessing an extraordinary talent that demanded respect and admiration. As the piece continued, the pianist's skill seemed effortless. His movements were fluid, his expressions controlled yet full of emotion. He introduced subtle shifts in tempo, pauses that created suspense and delicate flourishes that enhanced the beauty of the music. The choir, guided by his lead, responded flawlessly, their voices merging with the piano to create a sound that felt complete and alive. The tension in the room, once palpable, now transformed into an electric sense of anticipation. Every listener, from the courtiers to the palace staff, was caught in the moment, holding their breath, waiting to see how the piece would unfold. The pianist's calm demeanor, paired with his exceptional skill, commanded attention without demanding it. The hall was alive with sound and emotion, yet it felt controlled, deliberate, and perfectly balanced. The young pianist navigated a particularly delicate passage, his fingers moving lightly yet confidently over the keys. The notes shimmered through the hall, creating a sense of floating in time. The choir followed, their voices perfectly synchronized, adding depth and texture to the performance. The effect was mesmerizing, drawing every listener into a shared experience that transcended words. King Leo XIV, known for his sharp criticism, found himself unable to speak. The smirk that had once played on his lips was gone, replaced by a thoughtful, almost reverent expression. He understood that he had underestimated the young pianist. The skill, the composure, the emotional depth were beyond what he had expected. The performance was no longer a simple challenge. It was a revelation. The final sections of the piece were intricate and challenging, demanding full concentration and flawless execution. The pianist played with a precision that was both remarkable and inspiring. Each note was clear, each transition smooth, each chord perfectly balanced. The music soared, filling the hall with a powerful resonance that left no listener untouched. The choir followed with dedication, their voices a perfect complement to the piano, creating a harmony that was breathtaking in its beauty. When the last note faded into silence, the hall remained still. Not a whisper, not a movement, only the lingering resonance of music that had spoken directly to the hearts of everyone present. The pianist lifted his hands from the keys, his expression calm, humble, and composed. The choir mirrored his poise, waiting for the reaction that they knew would come. King Leo XIV finally spoke, his voice low but full of genuine admiration. "You have transformed a challenge into a masterpiece," he said, acknowledging not only the pianist's skill, but the courage and composure it took to perform under scrutiny. The courtiers and staff, previously doubtful, nodded in agreement, recognizing that they had witnessed something extraordinary. The young pianist did not seek praise or applause. He simply acknowledged the room with a quiet nod, letting the music itself serve as his statement. The moment was not about recognition. It was about demonstrating that talent, humility, and composure could overcome expectation and doubt. Everyone in the hall understood this, from the king to the newest palace servant. The impact of the performance lingered, a quiet reminder of what true skill could achieve. As the audience absorbed the experience, the young pianist prepared for the next piece, ready to continue guiding the choir through the music. The tension had transformed into respect, skepticism into admiration, and doubt into inspiration. The hall was alive not just with sound, but with the realization that they had witnessed a moment that would be remembered, a display of human skill and dedication that transcended all expectations. The grand hall, bathed in the soft glow of the afternoon sun, seemed transformed. The earlier whispers and small movements of the courtiers had vanished, replaced by a palpable stillness that spoke of complete attention. The young pianist's performance had grown beyond a mere demonstration of skill. It had become a living expression, a wave of sound that captured the hearts of everyone present. Every key he pressed seemed to reverberate through the room, connecting not only with the walls and the high ceilings, but with the emotions of every listener. The pianist began a new sequence, his fingers gliding effortlessly over the keys. The notes emerged with a clarity that seemed almost magical, precise yet full of warmth. He played as if he were conversing with the piano, each chord a word, each pause a thought, each melody a sentence in a story that no one had heard before. The choir watched, entranced, their voices following his subtle gestures, their own sounds weaving seamlessly with the piano. It was a perfect dialogue, not dictated by instruction but by instinct and shared understanding. King Leo XIV leaned forward in his seat, eyes fixed on the pianist. The earlier amusement had faded entirely, replaced by fascination and respect. He realized that he was witnessing a rare talent, something beyond ordinary comprehension. Each phrase of music carried emotion so genuine that it was impossible to remain unaffected. The king had seen many performances, some from renowned musicians and some from those less accomplished, but nothing had ever stirred him like this. Courtiers, too, were caught in the spell of the performance. Some had initially doubted the pianist, sneering at his modest appearance and quiet demeanor. Now they were completely captivated, unable to look away. Each note seemed to pierce through any preconceptions, leaving only admiration and wonder. Even the palace staff, who had seen countless musicians pass through the halls, paused their work to witness the unfolding magic. The pianist's technique was impeccable, yet it was not mechanical. There was a softness in his touch, a sensitivity to each note that made the music come alive. He added subtle variations in tempo, dynamic shifts that made the hall itself feel like it was breathing along with the music. The choir responded instinctively, their voices rising and falling in perfect harmony, creating a soundscape that was rich, emotional, and deeply moving. As the piece grew more complex, the pianist did not falter. He moved through challenging passages with a fluidity that seemed almost impossible. His hands danced across the keys, creating intricate patterns that were both technically brilliant and emotionally profound. The audience could see the concentration on his face, the quiet determination, and the deep connection to the music. It was clear that every note was chosen with intention, every movement guided by a combination of skill and passion. King Leo XIV's expression was one of quiet astonishment. He had intended to test, to provoke a reaction, perhaps even to expose a flaw. Yet what he saw was a demonstration of mastery and grace under pressure. The young pianist had transformed the king's challenge into an opportunity to showcase something extraordinary. The music was no longer just sound. It was a story, an experience that resonated with every soul in the hall. The room itself seemed to respond. The tall windows reflected the sunlight in a way that highlighted the piano, almost as if the hall itself was participating in the performance. The chandeliers sparkled, the marble floor shimmered, and even the tapestries seemed to hum with the resonance of the music. Every listener felt a connection, a shared experience that transcended the ordinary boundaries between performer and audience. The pianist introduced a delicate melody, soft and tender, that seemed to float above the room. The notes were precise yet gentle, creating a sense of intimacy despite the vastness of the hall. The choir's voices softened to match, blending seamlessly, adding layers of warmth and depth. It was as if time had slowed, the world outside forgotten, and only the music and the moment mattered. The emotional intensity was palpable, drawing everyone into a shared understanding that was both profound and moving. Even the courtiers, who had been conditioned to maintain composure in the presence of royalty, felt their hearts stirred. Some closed their eyes, allowing themselves to be carried away by the music. Others watched in quiet awe, unable to look away from the pianist's mastery. Every movement of his hands, every subtle shift in rhythm, conveyed a story that was impossible to ignore. The performance was no longer just about technical skill. It was about emotion, connection, and the power of art to touch the soul. King Leo XIV, who had once thought to mock, now found himself fully absorbed. He had underestimated the young pianist, judging by appearances rather than talent. The music was teaching him a lesson he could not have anticipated, that true mastery was not loud or flashy, but calm, deliberate, and deeply expressive. Each note played reinforced this understanding, creating a moment of profound realization. The complexity of the piece increased, weaving together rapid passages and sustained notes, soft melodies, and powerful chords. The pianist navigated these transitions with a combination of precision and grace that left no room for error. Every phrase was crafted with care, every chord resonated with clarity. The choir, inspired by his leadership, followed flawlessly, their voices becoming an extension of the piano itself. The harmony was breathtaking, a perfect blend of sound and emotion. The audience's reaction was almost involuntary. Courtiers leaned forward, palace staff paused their duties, and even the quietest corners of the hall seemed filled with attention and reverence. There were no whispers, no distractions, only the collective presence of those fully immersed in the music. The young pianist, aware of the attention yet unaffected by it, continued with calm determination, allowing the music to speak for itself. As the performance reached its climax, the pianist introduced a series of powerful chords, each one resonating with energy and emotion. The choir responded with matching intensity, their voices blending seamlessly with the piano. The hall vibrated with sound, creating an atmosphere that was both electrifying and deeply moving. Every listener felt the power of the music, a shared experience that transcended individual perception. King Leo XIV's eyes widened, and he leaned closer, unable to tear his gaze from the pianist. He had come expecting amusement, perhaps ridicule, but what he witnessed was something far greater. The young pianist's skill, composure, and emotional depth had turned a potential challenge into a display of extraordinary talent. The king understood that this moment would be remembered, not just for the performance, but for the profound impact it had on everyone present. The final notes of the piece lingered in the air, soft yet powerful, fading slowly but leaving a lasting impression. The hall remained silent, as if everyone was collectively holding their breath, savoring the final resonance. The young pianist lifted his hands from the keys, his expression calm, composed and serene. There was no need for applause. The music itself had spoken, leaving an indelible mark on every heart in the room. The courtiers, the palace staff, and the choir absorbed the moment, understanding that they had witnessed something extraordinary. The young pianist had not only played with technical brilliance but had conveyed emotion, storytelling, and a depth of understanding that few could match. King Leo XIV, who had arrived expecting to judge, had instead learned a valuable lesson about humility, talent, and the power of music to move people beyond words. As the hall slowly returned to normal, the energy remained changed. The young pianist, having faced the king's challenge with grace and skill, had left a lasting impression. He had shown that true mastery is not about appearances or bravado, but about dedication, focus, and the ability to connect with others through one's art. The memory of this performance would linger in the minds of all who were present, a quiet triumph that resonated far beyond the walls of the palace. The room remained hushed after the last note faded, as if the very air had been transformed by the young pianist's performance. Everyone in the hall felt a sense of awe, a quiet recognition that they had just witnessed something extraordinary. Courtiers, palace staff, and choir members alike were caught in a moment of silent admiration, hesitant to break the spell that had been cast by the music. The king, who had once intended to mock, now sat in thoughtful reflection, absorbing every detail of what had unfolded before him. The young pianist lowered his hands from the keys and took a moment to steady his breath. His calm presence had remained constant throughout the performance, and now it served to focus the attention of the room on him even more. He did not bow or gesture for applause, his demeanor humble and composed. It was clear that the music, not the recognition, was his primary purpose. His quiet strength seemed to fill the space, leaving the audience in a collective state of contemplation and awe. King Leo XIV finally spoke, his voice deliberate and measured, carrying authority but also a note of genuine respect. "You have shown remarkable skill and composure," he said, acknowledging the young pianist's mastery. "It is not only the notes that you play, but the depth of understanding and the way you guide those around you that sets you apart." The words were unexpected, yet they rang true, a recognition that the pianist had earned not through flamboyance but through dedication, talent, and unwavering focus. The courtiers murmured quietly among themselves, exchanging glances of astonishment. Many had entered the hall expecting entertainment, perhaps even ridicule, yet the performance had surpassed all expectations. The young pianist, with his modest appearance and unassuming demeanor, had commanded respect and admiration through nothing but his music. It was a lesson in humility and excellence, one that resonated deeply with everyone present. The choir members, still in their positions, felt a renewed sense of connection to the music and to each other. The pianist's guidance had not only enhanced the technical execution of the pieces, but it also brought out an emotional depth in their voices that they had not known they possessed. They exchanged quiet nods, silently acknowledging the impact of the pianist's leadership and artistry. Each singer felt inspired to continue performing with renewed focus and passion. The palace staff, who had observed quietly from the sidelines, also felt the power of the performance. They had seen many musicians come and go, yet few had left such a lasting impression. There was a sense that they had been part of something rare, a moment that transcended ordinary performance and became a shared experience that would be remembered for years to come. Even the servants, who usually remained unnoticed in the background, could not help but feel moved by the music and the calm authority of the pianist. The king, who had initially approached with amusement, now saw the young pianist in a completely different light. The smirk that had once crossed his face was gone, replaced by thoughtful reflection. He realized that he had underestimated the power of quiet confidence and true mastery. The pianist's ability to perform flawlessly under scrutiny, to inspire and guide the choir, and to create an emotional connection with the audience had transformed a potential moment of mockery into an unforgettable triumph. The pianist, sensing the room's continued attention, allowed a moment of silence to linger. He did not rush to fill it with words or gestures. Instead, he let the performance speak for itself, knowing that the impact of his music would resonate far longer than any immediate applause. The room remained still, every listener caught in a moment of contemplation and appreciation. The music had become more than sound. It was a shared experience, a testament to the power of dedication and artistry. King Leo XIV finally rose from his seat, moving closer to the piano with deliberate steps. His presence commanded attention, and the courtiers instinctively quieted further. He looked directly at the young pianist, his expression now one of respect and recognition. "You have shown courage and brilliance," the king said. "It is not easy to perform under scrutiny, yet you have done so with grace and skill. You have earned the admiration of all present." The young pianist nodded quietly, acknowledging the king's words with humility. He did not seek to boast or draw attention to himself, understanding that the true measure of success lay in the music itself and the emotions it had evoked. The king's recognition was significant, but it was secondary to the personal satisfaction of having performed with authenticity, skill, and composure. The courtiers began to express their appreciation more openly, some clapping softly, others whispering words of admiration. The choir members exchanged smiles, recognizing the shared accomplishment and the guidance that had elevated their performance. Even the palace staff, who often went unnoticed, allowed themselves a quiet acknowledgement of the extraordinary talent they had witnessed. The atmosphere was one of mutual respect and admiration, a collective acknowledgement of the pianist's impact. The young pianist then returned to the piano to play a brief closing piece, not as a response to applause but as a continuation of the musical journey. His fingers moved lightly over the keys, creating a gentle melody that seemed to breathe through the hall. The choir, inspired by his presence, joined in softly, their voices blending in harmony. The effect was subtle yet profound, leaving a lasting impression on everyone present. The room was alive with the resonance of shared experience, a reminder that true artistry transcends both expectation and judgment. As the closing piece came to an end, the pianist lifted his hands and allowed the silence to settle once more. The audience absorbed the final notes, understanding that they had witnessed something rare and extraordinary. The king, courtiers, choir members, and palace staff alike were united in their appreciation, recognizing the quiet power of skill, composure, and dedication. The young pianist had not only performed but had left an indelible mark on every heart in the hall. King Leo XIV, now fully aware of the magnitude of the moment, addressed the pianist once more. "You have shown that true mastery is not measured by appearance or bravado, but by focus, discipline, and the ability to move others. Your performance will be remembered not only for its technical brilliance but for the emotion and connection it has created." The words were sincere, carrying the weight of authority and recognition. The young pianist accepted them with quiet humility, knowing that the greatest reward lay in the impact of his music on those who had heard it. The courtiers continued to murmur, expressing admiration and astonishment. Some discussed the subtle nuances of the pianist's technique. Others reflected on the emotional depth that had been conveyed. The choir, invigorated and inspired, felt a renewed sense of purpose and cohesion. Even the palace staff, who often witnessed performances without comment, spoke softly among themselves about the rare talent they had just experienced. The impact of the performance extended beyond the immediate moment, leaving a lasting impression on all present. The young pianist carefully collected his sheet music and adjusted the piano, his movements calm and deliberate. He did not rush or seek attention, understanding that the performance itself had already conveyed everything necessary. The hall, once filled with expectation and tension, now carried an air of respect, admiration, and quiet triumph. The moment had shifted, and the young pianist's presence and skill had transformed the energy of the room. King Leo XIV watched intently, his earlier skepticism replaced by genuine respect. He had come expecting to witness talent, perhaps to mock or test, yet he had seen something far greater. The young pianist had met every challenge with composure, skill, and emotional depth, turning potential judgment into admiration. The king understood that this performance would be remembered, not only for its technical brilliance but for the way it had inspired and moved everyone present. The courtiers, choir, and palace staff began to leave the hall slowly, still reflecting on the performance and its impact. Each person carried with them a sense of having witnessed something rare and meaningful, a shared memory that would endure long after the final notes had faded. The young pianist remained near the piano, quietly preparing for future performances, his demeanor calm, humble, and resolute. The afternoon in the palace had been transformed. What began as a challenge and an opportunity for ridicule had become a testament to the power of talent, composure, and dedication. The young pianist had not only performed with skill, but had created a moment of profound emotional resonance, leaving every listener deeply moved. The king, courtiers, choir, and palace staff alike understood that they had witnessed something extraordinary, a performance that would be remembered and spoken of for years to come. As the hall emptied, the young pianist took a final glance around the space. The sunlight now fell at a different angle, casting long shadows that danced gently on the marble floor. The energy of the room remained, a quiet reminder of the triumph that had unfolded. He packed his sheet music carefully, not seeking accolades or recognition but content in the knowledge that his music had spoken, had moved, and had left a lasting impact on all who had heard it. The silent triumph was complete, and its effect would resonate far beyond the walls of the palace. The next morning, the palace seemed quieter than usual, as though it were still absorbing the events of the previous day. Courtiers moved with a thoughtful calm, and the staff carried out their duties with a lingering sense of reflection. Even the choir members who had performed were quieter than normal, replaying in their minds the remarkable performance of the young pianist. The energy that had filled the grand hall had not dissipated. Instead, it lingered like a gentle echo, reminding everyone that something extraordinary had occurred. The young pianist arrived at the palace early, carrying only his sheet music in a small bag. He walked calmly through the familiar corridors, observing the subtle changes in the atmosphere. Courtiers and staff alike gave him respectful nods, a quiet acknowledgement of the impact he had made the day before. There was no fanfare, no exaggerated gestures, only a shared understanding that his talent had left an unforgettable mark on the palace. King Leo XIV was already in the hall, reviewing documents, yet he looked up as the pianist entered. There was a warmth in his gaze, a clear sign that his perception had shifted completely. The smirk and amusement of the previous day were replaced by genuine respect. The king motioned for the pianist to approach, and as he did, there was an unspoken understanding that today's rehearsal would carry a new significance. The choir assembled, sensing the importance of the moment. They were more focused than ever, not out of fear or obligation, but from a renewed sense of purpose inspired by the pianist's previous performance. There was a shared anticipation in the room, a subtle energy that suggested today would not be an ordinary rehearsal. The pianist took his place at the piano, setting his sheet music carefully, his calm demeanor anchoring the entire ensemble. He began to play, and immediately the hall was filled with a familiar sense of awe. The music was not louder or faster than before. It was simply infused with the quiet confidence of someone who knew the power of their craft. The choir responded instinctively, their voices blending in harmony with the piano. The sound was rich, layered, and emotionally resonant. Each note was precise yet full of feeling, and every listener could sense the depth of understanding that guided the performance. King Leo XIV observed intently, occasionally nodding, as if confirming to himself that the pianist's skill was indeed as exceptional as he had realized. The performance was not about impressing the king or anyone else. It was about the music itself, and the connection it could create between the pianist, the choir, and the audience. Every phrase of the music carried emotion, subtlety, and intention, making it impossible to separate technical mastery from expressive depth. As the pianist continued, he introduced subtle changes to the previous compositions, slight variations in tempo, dynamic shifts, and nuanced emphasis on certain notes. The choir adapted seamlessly, demonstrating the trust they had developed in his guidance. It was clear that his influence extended beyond the notes. He had inspired confidence, attention, and a deeper understanding of music among the ensemble. The hall seemed to vibrate with the collective energy of the performance, every listener caught in the delicate balance between sound and emotion. Courtiers and palace staff watched in quiet awe. Many had initially doubted the young pianist, but their skepticism had been thoroughly replaced by admiration and respect. They whispered softly among themselves, discussing the subtle brilliance of his performance and the calm authority he displayed. Even the youngest staff members, who were often unfamiliar with such performances, could feel the emotional resonance and skill emanating from the piano and choir. The music had transcended expectation, touching hearts in ways that words could not capture. King Leo XIV, fully aware of the uniqueness of the moment, allowed himself to be drawn into the experience. The performance reminded him that true mastery was not about spectacle or superficial display. It was about skill, composure, and the ability to create a profound connection. He had entered the palace expecting entertainment, perhaps a moment to exercise judgment or provoke amusement, but he found himself deeply moved. The young pianist had turned the tables completely, using nothing but music to convey emotion, command respect, and leave a lasting impression. The piece reached its most intricate section, requiring precise coordination and emotional expression. The pianist's fingers moved effortlessly across the keys, executing complex passages with a combination of technical skill and expressive control. The choir followed with perfect timing, each voice complementing the piano, creating a tapestry of sound that was both intricate and deeply moving. Every note, every chord, every pause seemed intentional, as if the music itself had a life independent of the performer. The courtiers and palace staff found themselves emotionally engaged in a way they had not expected. Some closed their eyes, allowing the music to carry them, while others watched the pianist's every move, fascinated by the mastery and subtlety of his technique. Even the king, known for his critical eye, was completely absorbed, recognizing that he had underestimated the power of calm confidence and disciplined artistry. The performance was a revelation, a demonstration that true talent was measured not by appearance or bravado, but by dedication, skill, and the ability to connect deeply with others. As the final section approached, the pianist introduced a gentle, soaring melody that seemed to fill the hall with light. The choir softened, their voices intertwining with the piano in a delicate harmony that felt almost ethereal. The audience was captivated, drawn into the music as if it were a living presence enveloping them. The energy in the room was profound, a shared experience that transcended hierarchy, status, and expectation. For a few moments, the entire palace existed solely in the realm of music. The last notes lingered in the air, soft yet powerful, gradually fading into a quiet resonance that filled the room with a sense of completion. The pianist lifted his hands from the keys, calm and composed, yet there was a quiet triumph in his demeanor. The choir followed, maintaining the final note in perfect harmony before settling into silence. The hall remained still, every listener absorbing the magnitude of what had just been performed. King Leo XIV rose from his seat, approaching the pianist with a deliberate, measured pace. The respect in his eyes was unmistakable, and his voice carried a tone of genuine admiration. "You have shown extraordinary talent and composure," he said. "Your music speaks not only through technique but through the depth of your understanding, and it has left a lasting impression on all of us. Today you have not only performed, you have inspired." The young pianist acknowledged the king's words with a simple nod, his humility evident. He did not seek praise or recognition. The true reward was the impact of his music on those who had heard it. The king's acknowledgement, however, reinforced the significance of the performance, validating the quiet confidence and dedication that had carried him through the previous day and the current morning. The courtiers, palace staff, and choir members expressed their admiration openly, some with soft applause, others with quiet words of respect. The atmosphere was filled with gratitude, recognition, and inspiration. The young pianist's presence and skill had transformed the ordinary rehearsal into a memorable experience, leaving an indelible mark on the hearts and minds of everyone present. As the hall began to empty, the energy remained. The performance had not only been a demonstration of technical skill, but a testament to the power of calm confidence, composure, and the ability to communicate through art. The young pianist carefully gathered his sheet music and belongings, moving through the hall with the same quiet dignity that had characterized his every action. The audience, now dispersed, carried with them the memory of an extraordinary performance, one that would be spoken of and remembered for years to come. King Leo XIV lingered in the hall for a moment, reflecting on the events that had unfolded. He had learned a valuable lesson about underestimating others, the importance of humility, and the transformative power of skill and dedication. The young pianist, with nothing but his music and calm presence, had created an experience that transcended expectation, challenged perception, and inspired everyone who had witnessed it. The sun now shone brightly through the tall windows, illuminating the polished floors and casting long, gentle shadows. The hall, once filled with tension and anticipation, now carried a sense of fulfillment, quiet triumph, and lasting impact. The young pianist, having completed his performance, had not only met the challenges placed before him, but had elevated the entire palace into a shared experience of admiration, inspiration, and awe. The memory of this day would remain, a testament to the extraordinary power of talent, humility, and the profound impact of music.